I never imagined I would find myself back in the tiny apartment that had always felt too small, back under the same roof that had once symbolized comfort and safety, yet now felt like a cage closing in with every passing day. I don't know where to begin. Maybe with the moment I realized that nothing in my life was the way it had been supposed to be, the way I had always imagined it would be when I was younger, full of ambition and plans, a life of my own, a place I could call mine. A bed I could sleep in without guilt or resentment, a life that didn't make me feel like I was failing at every possible level. But all of that had crumbled in ways that were small at first, subtle, like the quiet erosion of the ground beneath my feet, until one day it had collapsed completely under me, leaving me with nothing but a suitcase and a hollow sense of shame as I returned to my mother, Savannah Yates, a woman who had always been kind, generous, and stubbornly sweet, someone who welcomed me back without hesitation, who saw me still as the boy who used to follow her around, clinging to the edges of her skirts, begging her not to go to work, oblivious to the man I had become, oblivious to the bitter disappointment that now carved itself into my every thought and every moment. In her kindness, she offered me the bed while she took the old mattress on the floor, insisting that she could manage without complaint, and I agreed because I had no choice, because I had nowhere else to go, because pride and dignity were luxuries I no longer possessed. Yet even as we shared the same bed, we maintained distance, a careful spacing between us, edges of the mattress like invisible barriers, as though the physical separation could keep the weight of our emotions contained, though it never did. The first nights were a blur of sleeplessness, my mind running in endless circles, the apartment too small, the walls too thin, no privacy anywhere, every sound amplified, every movement observed, a constant reminder that I was trapped not just in space but in time, in circumstance, in a life I had failed to live the way I wanted. The deeper the nights grew, the more restless I became, my body tense, muscles aching not from exertion but from the tension of being confined, the heat of frustration settling low in my chest, a pressure I could neither name nor release, lying awake while Savannah slept, breathing slow, even seemingly untroubled by the storm inside me. As the days passed, the monotony of being under her roof, of depending on her for everything from food to a place to lay my head, became unbearable, gnawing at the edges of my mind until I started noticing things I had never paid attention to before, small, innocent actions that somehow twisted into a reflection of the life I had lost, the freedom I had squandered, the opportunities one had let slip. Every gesture, every glance, every laugh she let slip out into the empty apartment was a reminder that I was here not by choice but by circumstance, and as the nights grew longer, my thoughts darker, I found myself slipping into a mental maze I had no map for, where guilt, regret, and a sort of forbidden yearning mingled into a suffocating fog that filled the room, pressing down on my chest until it was difficult to breathe. I began to realize that what I was feeling was not just simple nostalgia or longing for past safety, it was an obsession with control, with closeness, with reclaiming some fragment of my life that had been stolen by layoffs, by bad luck, by choices I had made or failed to make. Every moment spent near her was a battle against impulses I had spent years suppressing, impulses not of the body in the obvious sense, but impulses of thought, desire for approval, for validation, for the comfort of being seen, truly seen, in a way that neither of us could articulate. Yet the tension between us grew, thick, palpable, a silent conversation carried in glances, in subtle movements, in proximity and retreat, and I would lie awake while she slept, observing her small adjustments, the way she shifted under the covers, the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the soft exhalation that escaped her lips, and it filled me with a longing I could not speak, a craving for connection that terrified me because it was so intimate, so impossible. No matter how I tried to distract myself with music books or late-night walks, my mind would return inevitably to the apartment, to her, to the unbearable proximity that forced me to confront my failures and my desire to escape them. The days became a routine of careful observation and self-restraint, of pretending to sleep while my mind replayed every interaction, every touch, every accidental brush of a hand against hers in the kitchen or when handing her a cup of tea, and each interaction felt like walking on a tightrope stretched across a chasm of shame and regret. I began to dream vividly, dreams that blurred the line between reality and imagination, where the apartment seemed to expand into impossible spaces, shadows deepening, silence stretching into echoing corridors, and I would awaken gasping, drenched in sweat, heart pounding, feeling as though the night had physically tried to pull me apart. Even waking moments offered no relief because the apartment, though familiar, had become a psychological trap, a space where my insecurities, my dependence, my inability to maintain a life of my own collided with my desire for acceptance, for approval, for any sign that I had not completely failed in my humanity. Savannah, ever sweet, ever patient, began to adjust her behavior too, subtle changes I noticed with an almost painful clarity. She stopped wearing the thin nightgowns that had been her comfort, layered her clothing as though to shield herself, spoke with clipped sentences when I was near, movements more measured, as though she too sensed the shift in the atmosphere, the invisible but undeniable tension building between us. Every day, every interaction, became a careful negotiation of space and emotion, where silence spoke volumes, where glances held meaning we could neither acknowledge nor address. Yet we coexisted not in ease but in an uneasy stasis of fragile balance where one wrong step could shatter the fragile truce, and I became obsessed with controlling my own reactions, my breathing, the position of my body, the distance. I kept every minor detail magnified to an unbearable degree. Because I had nowhere else to go, nowhere else to be, and the apartment had become a crucible where all my failures and my fears were concentrated, pressed against my consciousness until I was hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow, every movement that might signal judgment or disapproval. I started taking long walks, wandering through streets at night, letting the cold air bite at my skin in a vain attempt to shake the psychological weight I carried. Yet no matter where I went, Savannah remained with me in my mind, her presence ghosting every thought, every interaction, a spectre I could neither avoid nor confront directly. Returning home was worse than the walks because I could hear her breathing, could sense the shift as she moved through the apartment. And every ordinary action, making tea, picking up laundry, sitting at the counter, was infused with meaning my rational mind knew it did not deserve to ascribe. We both began to build walls, her in subtle avoidance, me in silent tension, yet the walls did not protect either of us from the mental heat of proximity. I began to realize that this was a new kind of obsession, not sexual but psychological, a fascination with what had been lost, with what could not be reclaimed, a desire to maintain connection even as everything in me screamed to escape. Every night, as I lay awake, I confronted myself, my failures, my dependence, my fears, my shame, my need to assert control over thoughts that threatened to undo me. She too changed, subtle signs in her speech, her posture, her pacing, until one evening she spoke, quietly, measured, almost imperceptibly firm. "Zachariah, you need to leave." It hit me like a physical blow, a culmination of weeks of tension, of careful psychological wrestling, and I understood immediately that staying was not just unwise, it was impossible, that whatever connection we had, whatever unspoken tension, had become a hazard to both of us, that moral lines had been approached too closely in thought if not in deed, and that the only way to survive ourselves was to separate, to extract myself from the apartment, from the proximity, from the constant, invisible psychological pull. The next day I left quietly, bag over shoulder, the weight of the unsaid, the unprocessed, the invisible yet all-consuming tension following me into the world the small apartment left behind, but not the lessons, not the guilt, not the understanding that desire in any form can be a trap. That proximity to what one cannot allow is a crucible for the mind, and that some desires, some obsessions remain long after the physical space has been vacated, lingering in thought and memory in the tense, restless nights where sleep is uneasy and the mind replays interactions in endless loops, teaching, punishing, reminding. As I moved into the world again, couch to couch, temporary shelters and friends' apartments, I carried with me the stark clarity of what it means to be human, to be trapped in circumstance, to wrestle with moral and emotional complexity, to survive the psychological heat of forbidden thoughts, to understand that distance is sometimes the only remedy, that boundaries, though invisible, are vital, and that even when physical escape is possible, the mind will not forget the memory of proximity, of tension, of the need for control, of the emotional intensity that can exist without violation, remains, a shadow stitched into the very fabric of being. I continue to wake, to breathe, to navigate a world forever changed by the lessons of one small apartment, one shared bed, one suffocating, intense, unspoken bond between a man and the mother who raised him, and though I have walked away, though I have scattered myself across cities and couches, the understanding remains a heavy, invisible weight, that some moments define the person in ways that cannot be undone, that some desires, though harmless in outward manifestation, can shape, bend, and warp the psyche in ways that linger, teaching caution, humility, and the relentless necessity of distance, self-awareness, and restraint, until the nights are less oppressive, the mind less restless, and the apartment, though miles away, remains in memory as the place where I first truly confronted the depths of my own mind, the frailty of human desire, the intensity of proximity, and the difficult, lifelong process of separating thought from action, longing from reality, and the inevitable understanding that some chapters, though closed physically, never fully leave the mind, echoing in every restless night, every tentative interaction, every careful thought, shaping who I am and who I must continue to strive to be.